But a good death only comes after a good life.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another Backlot Banter movie review. My name is Tucker Hazel, and of course, today I am joined by my co-host, who is wanted dead by thousands across the globe, Tanner Dykstra, and today we're here to talk about the fourth and maybe final installment in the John Wick franchise, John Wick Chapter 4. Keanu is back. He's thinking he's back, and we were back in theaters to see that film. But if you want to talk to us about John Wick 4, because there's a lot to talk about with this movie, please do me a favor, join Discord. You know what a Discord is. You're not stupid. Tanner, thank you very, very much for joining me here for this review. I'm very excited to talk about John Wick Chapter 4. Give me your opening thoughts.
Tucker, it seems like more and more often now, we get a movie that comes along and the reception is generally, and from myself as well, wow, this is a new defining film for the action genre. And it feels good as an action fan to be getting one of those every year, every 6 months now.
Yeah.
And John Wick Chapter 4 is just another one of those where you're watching it for 2 hours and 40 minutes and you're like, this is the best action movie I've seen in my entire life. How is the genre going to top this? And they consistently do, but nay, John Wick Chapter 4 raised that bar once again. It is wall-to-wall fantastic. I think it is fantastically paced, where you start out at like an A tier, and then you get to like an S triple plus tier at the very end of the film, where you are on the edge of your seat, as I was. You are cheering, you are along with the ride with John Wick in his fourth outing, and Keanu Reeves is fantastic. Obviously, you have a fantastic ensemble cast. The score, the cinematography, it's firing on all cylinders. We're emptying our clip with John Wick.
Ooh,
Chapter
I like
4.
that. Yeah. And I 100% agree. This is another one of those great modern action films that, to me, I think blows anything that came before of it out of the water. There are moments that I really, really like in the first two John Wick films. I like 3 a lot, almost on the same level as this one. But I think 4, with its cinematography and with the spectacle and complexity of these set pieces that it's going for, is just on another level of action cinema. And I had a fantastic time, but I do disagree in a few areas, which I'd like to nail in on, which is why this is not going to get a 10 out of 10 perfect for me. I do think this film has some flaws, and I want to start with the negatives so that we can like ramp up and just do a bunch of positives,
just as John Wick Chapter 4 does. But Tucker,
yes,
what flaws are you going to poke in John Wick Chapter 4?
That is one of the problems. I think it ramps up a lot near the end, and while I'm enjoying it for the first part of the film, I do think a lot of the first half of this film is weirdly paced. There are long sections of this movie without any action, which is fine, but I think the balance is what's strange to me. Is that first Osaka fight, Salsa fight, is like 45 minutes long, and I think that is a little bit much, and it gets a little bit repetitive, and he's fighting guys in lots of different locations, but I think that could have been made into a 30-minute fight, and you wouldn't have been any the wiser. We talked about in some of our other reviews of movies that sometimes an action set piece can go on, even though it's great, it can go on for a long time, start feeling drawn out a little bit. And I think I felt that a lot in that first sequence, but luckily that never happened again in the movie, because the rest of the set pieces, I think, are much more finely tuned than that first 45-minute continuing set piece.
No, I can definitely see that. And Tucker, I'll be honest with you, I felt it a little bit too.
Yeah.
Maybe we are just spoiled, our brains are attention rotted, perhaps.
I think that's definitely true.
Okay, sure. But yeah, I can definitely see that. But yeah, at the same time, I just have to think back to that first action sequence in Osaka and be like, I said this when the movie finished, when the credits were rolling, I'm like, that is an A tier action set piece, and is probably like what most action films can only aspire to for their third act action sequence. And we start there for John Wick Chapter 4. And yes, it can go on a little bit too long, it can get repetitive, but I think it also sets the tone for the grueling process these action sequences are for John Wick. And also, like, the extent to which he has to go to defeat a single guy, because that's something that I really appreciate about the franchise as a whole, and really comes to fruition in the magnum opus of this series, is that this is not easy for John Wick. I said this when we were on our classic post movie breakdown, is that what I love about John Wick as an action hero is that he is the best at what he does, but it's not easy for him. You see the grueling process that these fights take on him, especially in that Osaka sequence when he takes out the room full of guys after his friend tells him, hey, take out as many of these guys, kill as many as you can, which is just what you need to get John Wick going. And he takes them all out with nunchucks, with guns, with machine guns, with pistols, with all these stuff. And he's just kind of like,
yeah.
He just gets a moment to do that. I love when we get those moments in John Wick films, because it brings John Wick down to from his height as an action god a little bit. I think those are important moments for our hero.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that element of him as a guy is what makes him a good character. I think that his physicality is what really carries these films, and the stunt work that Keanu Reeves is so fantastic at. However, and here's my other critique, and the reason why, even though I'm a massive fan of this movie and I'm a big fan of the John Wick series, this cannot top other action films for me, is I don't like John Wick as a character. I don't think I don't think Keanu Reeves' performance is great. The reason that he has so few lines is because he delivers them in one voice and the same voice, and his lines are maybe 3 words maximum long, and to me they take a lot of the drama out of these sequences when he's delivering stock standard. I know exactly what he's going to say. It's going to pop into my mind. He's going to say it in the same flat monotone voice in every situation. And though that breaks out of that occasionally, he's a one-note guy. And that's not the biggest problem in the world, I think, primarily because I think the supporting cast is so fantastic here, which I absolutely do want to praise. But I don't, especially a problem with the 4th entry in the series, I don't feel like John Wick learned anything here. I don't think he changed at all. I think he was just the same guy, and what's his motivation? Even the villains kind of question that, and his friends are kind of questioning that. Like, he has no reason to fight to live or to die or to fight for, and then for that element of a protagonist to follow for 4 films, I'm loving what he's doing in the action. I'm loving him bouncing off these other characters, but I don't care about John Wick as a person. He peaked in the first one when he had a dog to fight for, but after that, he's just kind of, I want to get out of this. For what? To what? He doesn't have a house?
I think
does he have friends? I don't know.
I think the point though is that he could kind of like disappear, but he's become ingratiated back into this world to the extent that, as people point out in this, he's become addicted again to killing. People ask him, when is it going to stop? When are you gonna call it quits here? And I think that is the internal struggle for John Wick. And Tucker, I can see where you're coming from, absolutely. But I think that is, for me as someone who enjoys these films, part of the appeal of them is that
that's definitely true. It is distinct, and I respect it for that, because there's no one like John Wick, but I also kind of wish there was no one like John Wick, even John Wick. Because I do think that with a stronger personality, with a little bit better of a motivation, I would be really sold on this character and watching him get through. But as it stands, he's the main guy, and I gotta watch him a lot. But I would pretty much rather follow the storyline and personality of anyone around him. And this movie, I think, does such a great job at balancing a supporting cast of really rich, fascinating characters that have different roles to fill in the world and approach action sequences differently. And that, by comparison, kind of makes me dislike John Wick and the guy even more, because nobody is fascinating. The way he fights is fascinating. I want to know his backstory. And watching Donnie Yen as this blind guy with the craziest moves ever, he's got this fascinating backstory and really cool motivation. And Akira, like all these different characters, I want to know their stories. And they're so fascinating, and they have such great personalities and performances. But that's one of the great strengths of this film, is how many side characters there are, how well they're balanced, and how fascinating they all are.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think you bring up a good point there, Tucker. And to tie it back to this ensemble cast and tie it back to Keanu Reeves' performance, I think I'm gonna go and use a reading that people make of his character, classic character Neo in The Matrix, in that he is more of a a blank slate of a kind of
Sure.
character that you can project onto a little bit. And he is surrounded by an ensemble cast that has clear motivations, clear backstories, and
Yeah.
arguably be more outwardly charismatic than he is.
Mhm.
Even though I think
Yeah.
Keanu Reeves is endearing in this role as John Wick, but like even I think to someone in common with those Matrix movies and John Wick here, Lawrence Fishburne is
So much personality.
just chewing scenery
Oh
in
my
the
God, yeah.
any screen time that he's given, and he's not given a lot in this
Mhm.
film, but even when he is there, you're like, Lawrence Fishburne is back. What's he gonna say? He's
Yeah.
gonna be driving a speedboat and say, "Hail to the king, baby,"
Yeah.
and you love him for it. And as, of course, you brought up like Donnie Yen being an addition here,
Yeah.
having
Kane.
great. Kane having great chemistry with John Wick, having a
Absolutely.
really interesting interplay between those two characters. As like, I almost view Donnie Yen's character Kane as like what John Wick would have become if his wife and dog, wife to a larger extent, was not dead. If she were
Mhm.
still alive, the table, this sort of entity that we always hear about, would be holding her hostage to continue to get John Wick to, sort of
Yeah. Yeah.
serve their ends. And I think that Donnie Yen really serves as like an alternate timeline John Wick
Sure.
almost, who sacrificed his sight to the table for their own ends.
Mhm.
So I love the interplay where they're like these two guys who have been in this for a long time. They know each other. They're both tired, but they can't escape this system, both for
Yeah.
differing reasons. And
Yeah.
so I really like them as an addition here, as a pair.
Yeah, absolutely. And each of the supporting cast, I think, brings out a different side of the table and the John Wick world. How, as ridiculous as it is, makes it more textured, because I do feel like there are people in this world that I can identify and care about, at least to a certain extent. I think that the characters from the past films that they focused on, with Winston and Lance Reddick's character,
Mhm.
and Charon and John Wick, I thought they were fine, but it was always the supporting characters, and I think because we spend so much time with supporting characters here, I'm even more sold on. Yeah, I want to know the wide
Yeah,
world
yeah.
of John Wick, especially because the John Wick world is it even doesn't even attempt to be reality. Their
No.
bullets don't do anything in this
Yeah,
movie.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Everyone can tank 30 billion hits from anything. They can tank falls, they can tank slashes that don't even like usually make them bleed. They can shoot people, they can get hit by a car. There's no police, there's no government. The John Wick world is ridiculous. It is
Yeah.
4 action set pieces, and nowhere is that more apparent in the a multitude of action set pieces that we have here, in which there are a lot of civilians around, and
Mhm.
they do not give a single shit. They are sitting there, they're drinking their coffee, they're dancing, they're driving their cars, and I'm just watching people rip each other to shreds while 5 feet away are just like a couple going about their business. And I
Mhm.
love how kinetic that makes things feel. It makes no goddamn sense, but for a visual spectacle, from the visual spectacle angle, having tons of bodies moving around and lights flashing really makes it a feeling of chaos and claustrophobia, that no other film really tries, because they usually try to have a sense of realism. Like, yeah, people are gonna run away when they hear gunshots, but no one runs away when they hear a gunshot in the John Wick universe, and I
No.
love him for it.
Yeah, I absolutely do love that as well. I mean, it's just an element of this world that they've, built out sort of almost like under the radar in
Mhm.
in the John Wick series. And they built it up to such an extent that I'm watching this film, and they cut back to like the goth girl like call center where they
Yeah,
transfer the bounties and
in
stuff
the
like
in
that.
the Eiffel Tower, I believe.
Or yeah, maybe they're just stationed all over. I'm like, we're back. The Goth Girl call center's back. Where I remember
Yeah.
this from the previous films, and they just have that. They just have these things where like they're talking about the markers and stuff like that, and the table. And I'm like, oh yeah, the table, the markers, yeah, yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. I'm getting all these things. And I think to myself like, how do I know these things?
Yeah.
These just like random phrases that they have thrown out over the course of these
Yeah,
4 films, and I'm like,
tickets,
your ticket is
duels.
torn, you're excommunicado. They've just become these iconic lines, these iconic things in the world of John Wick.
Yeah.
But Tucker, I think we've beaten around the bush a little bit.
Yeah.
Let's talk about
Goddamn, look at that bush. The
it's
ground
beaten.
around it sure is beaten.
Yeah. It's beaten to goddamn shreds, just like the people in these films. Just
Well,
like
actually, no, because the people are usually surprisingly fine for all that they
Yeah.
go through, especially John Wick, who has not only a magic Kevlar jacket that he puts up like Dracula to walk around, but he also has the strongest skin known to man, because this guy goes through so much. And well, he has a few moments of bloody knuckles, or he'll get shot in heightened moments where there's some blood. He can take anything, and it's really funny.
But I wanted to break down our favorite action moments, the beating heart of John Wick Chapter 4. So if you don't want to know anything else about the action sequences, I would say if you haven't seen the film, maybe skip this portion, because I think it's better viewed when you don't know what's going to happen. Just
Why
like
don't
we
we
went
go
into
through
it.
that in our spoiler section?
Oh,
at
sure,
the end. There's
absolutely.
one
Okay.
final thing that I want to mention before we give
go
our
for it.
scores.
Yep.
Is this is one of the most beautifully shot movies I've ever
absolutely.
seen. I can't believe that a action film of this caliber, with this caliber of cinematography, or with this caliber of choreography, has this caliber of cinematography. The cinematographer is the cinematographer for a lot of the best looking Guillermo del Toro movies, including Nightmare Alley and Shape of Water, two films I love the cinematography for. And he's just going all out in this film, to the point where it's almost distracting, where it's like, how do you have every single shot have dramatic lighting and incredible color and insane camera angles that are either like at the bottom of characters' feet or looking down from above? It is dynamic. It is gorgeous. It is varied. It is richly colorful to a cartoonish level. But it is
just the
beautiful.
way that we frame all of these things. And John Ford said it best last year with The Fabelmans. You put the horizon at the top, it's interesting. You put the horizon at the bottom, it's interesting. And you know what? Our cinematography learned that lesson because it is so varied, as you were saying, Tucker. As you mentioned in our post theater walkout breakdown sesh, you said there's just like all the colors of the rainbow represented in the cinematography of this film. And I agree, it's fantastic. The choreography, obviously, of these things are fantastic. And the camera movement in these action sequences, or how we move the actors around the camera, rather, is remarkable. It's like unlike anything I've ever seen before.
And that, I think, is this film's greatest innovation, if you want to call it that, is bringing gorgeous use of color and camera work, which is used to a good extent in other action movies, but I don't think I've ever seen it to this level. I would put the cinematography and color grading and shot composition usage of this film up against any of the greats, even some of the match cuts, even some of the edits, up against other Oscar-winning films. I would really love to see this film get its flowers in those areas that action films do
almost
well,
never
but
get.
those are usually not the focus of those films. You're focused on the choreography, on the spectacle, but not like, wow, I really want to make this my backdrop on my computer, as I'm sure you will.
I will, of course. A few other things that I mentioned. Score is fantastic. It's very very hard techno, like the John Wick scores typically are, but I think it's like the best that we get here. You get a few needle drops that are great. The sound is also great. It obviously it primes you for it in the very opening of this film, when John Wick is sort of like building up the resistance, the calluses on his knuckles, training in the sewers of New York. And just every punch is like
the loudest punch possible,
a bomb being dropped, essentially. And it's crazy, and it primes you for just the audio-visual experience that is John Wick Chapter 4. And Tucker, how would you rate that audio-visual experience out of 10?
Here's the thing. John Wick Chapter 4, I don't think is a perfect movie. There are elements of it that, as I said at the beginning, with a little bit of pacing issues, and John Wick himself, that hold it back. But at the end of the day, this is an action film, and when it does its action, it's doing action almost better than anything I've ever seen. It is gorgeously shot, more so than any action film I've ever seen. It is long, but it doesn't outstay its welcome. It's always bouncing around to new characters and new locations all across the globe. This is action cinema at its best. It is so tightly focused on getting you from set piece to set piece, on setting up the stakes of the table and the Continental and yada yada yada. This is a fantastic film, and I think it's easily the best in the series, because I'm going to remember a lot of elements from the past films, but the characters here, I think, are much more distinct than previous films, and the diversity in location, I think, is sold a lot better here, because they're able to do stuff on much larger scale. So John Wick Chapter 4 for me is going to get a 9.4 out of 10. phenomenal movie.
Yeah. I'm not gonna be far off from you there, Tucker. I'm gonna say a 9.6.
Oh
Just
yeah.
consistently again raising the bar for action cinema. And Tucker, we're gonna get another one this year. I can feel it in my beating heart with Mission Impossible.
Oh,
Mission
Dead
Impossible
Reckoning Part
7
1.
Dead Reckoning Part 1.
Yes.
You gotta get the whole title in there. But Tucker, there's our scores. Let's get into spoilers for this, where we're basically just gonna talk about like our favorite action moments.
Yeah.
We have to talk about what our friend Joe has dubbed the Hotline Miami part, when it's top down. John Wick has an assault rifle that is kitted out with the Dragon's Breath rounds, which are basically just incendiary rounds that he is lighting dudes on. It just shoots fire and debris at people, and it's awesome to see play out in this top down sequence. I mean, and then it continues, it keeps going, and you're like, I have enough, please, thank you, please, I don't need any more. And it's like, no, take more.
Yeah. That, I think, is in my top 10 action set moments of all time, because
easily
it's like 4 minutes long, and it keeps going, and the camera keeps doing more and more interesting things, and it's playing like a video game. And the fact that you can see the spread shot of this rifle using the Dragon's Breath round is so perfect for the camera being far away and giving it this visual spectacle. And the knockback makes so much sense when they're getting hit and then they're on fire over there and people are coming in and out of doors. It's such an interesting way to frame an action sequence that I'm so glad they just committed to it, because it wasn't like some half-assed, oh, they're going to do this for 20 seconds. It's going to be this cool like moment in a larger thing. No, that is the sequence, and it's so cool that they went all in on that.
Yeah, it's also and maybe they're doing some hidden cuts here, but like meant to look like, or is one take.
Yeah,
I think there's a break, and then we go back to it again, which is my thing of like,
True.
oh god, we're getting more of this. But yeah, I mean, I think that's the highlight of this.
No.
It's the highlight in a film that is, you know, packed with other sequences, like the whatever that circular place with the arch in Paris is. I'm not going to
Triomphe.
Thank you very much. That's also awesome. I mean, you're just getting dudes randomly hit by cars. John Wick is throwing other people into cars. People are throwing him into cars. Then you get Mr. Nobody and his dog showing up, and the dog's like jumping across the roofs of cars.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah. And God, that's just another sequence where you talk about your civilian thing comes in, where like we are using the civilians in this world to, you know, like ramp up the action in this sequence. And then, as you mentioned, as we were walking out, you know, it just suddenly sort of stops, and John Wick has to can finally like deal with the rest of this without the distraction, and we can move forward. I think that is why it's an encapsulation of how the pacing is so good in all of these sequences and across the film.
Yeah, that there are 3 stages to our last act of this. Actually, there's 4, I would say.
Okay.
You have the Arc de Triomphe fight, which is fantastic and uses a lot of cars going very fast, going in circles around with this iconic piece of architecture in the background. That's great. And then you've got the fight in the abandoned house or church or whatever it
chateau,
is
perhaps,
that has the Hotline Miami sequence in it, and that's great too. And then you have the staircase fight, and the staircase fight is also awesome. And people are tumbling, and you're going up and down, and John Wick gets knocked down so many goddamn stairs, and then gets up and keeps on trucking. And there's so many great moments there. And then it ends in a duel, and the duel is really good, but it's not. Unfortunately, it's not at the level of the three things we just saw.
Is that we you talk about the stages, Tucker. You know, we come up out of we get our gun, we get our new suit for John Wick in the catacombs of Paris. He comes out of the street. We start off relatively simple for the John Wick films. It's a couple of guys in the street with cars. They're trying to hit him with cars. They're trying to shoot at him. John Wick takes these guys out handily, okay? Then we go into the Arc de Triomphe. Then we go into the staircase. Or no, then we go into the Hotline Miami. The chateau. And then we go into the staircase. And then we pair it all the way back. We bring it to fruition, the Donnie Yen and John Wick, Keanu Reeves character arc, where it's these two men who are friends and are sort of fighting each other out of obligation because of the system that has been set up for them by the High Table. And ultimately, what do? They grasp hands like old buddies do, and they say, "Nah, fuck the system, fuck Bill Skarsgård, get his ass." You know, they sort of work this thing out wordlessly. Even they do. And I love the lines that they exchange right before they're 10 paces away from each other, and they say, those who cling to life will die, and those who cling to death will live. And that sort of like triggers you and me like, oh God, one of them's going down, because that they just described each other. And then we're handing it to our asshole Bill Skarsgård, and
Yeah.
we kill him. We shoot him in the head with a goddamn musket ball from a
Mhm.
dueling pistol, and we're elated as an audience after 2 hours and 40 minutes. So I do think it is a good way to pare down our action but heighten that character stuff.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We also got to mention that there's this whole middle fight of the film,
Yeah.
which takes place in a club with waterfalls everywhere. Why are there so many waterfalls? There's so many goddamn people everywhere. It's after this whole
like card game that I don't understand
thing, yeah. And we've got Donnie Yen, and we got Mr. Nobody, and we've got John Wick, and we've got this guy who's cartoonishly large. He's got golden teeth,
Yet
and
Scott
they're pile
Adkins
driving off each other off of waterfalls. And it's like, what the hell is happening here? Everyone's wet constantly. That is another amazing fight in terms of visual spectacle, including water bouncing off of everything, flashing lights from the club, and moving bodies. There's so much going on, but the action is still followable. It's kind of sometimes hard to tell in moments, like, okay, they're walking through a crowd. This shot is very complex with water going over here and people's bodies over here, but I really do love how much is going on in that fight and how much you have to like sort of keep an eye on. And because it's so different from the other fights in the film, it's just another great highlight of this movie.
Yeah. And I do want to talk about Scott Adkins, because I think he is great. You know, he's this sort of in modern action, he's this very storied like martial artist guy who's never really gotten the spotlight per se like this in a film.
Sure.
And I do love that. I mean, we put him in a big suit. He's got the golden teeth. He's doing a German accent. He's chewing scenery in a manic way, much like Lawrence Fishburne is. And then, you know, he's sort of beset by the effortlessly cool Donnie Yen and Mr. Nobody and John Wick. And I love how he just sort of fluctuates from like, he's running away because he doesn't want to deal with any of this, and he's like, oh, okay, now I'll fight, and then he's running away again. He's getting shot in the ass and stuff like that. And then of course we ended all with him falling off a staircase directly onto his head, which is brutal. There's a lot of brutal moments here where at least I hope your audience is going to be like, oh, if you're watching this in a packed theater, because ours sure was. And it just heightened the entire experience. I love that this film is being experienced by wide audiences. It's going to do very well at the box office, it seems. And I cannot wait for. I'm really elated by audiences embracing this kind of action. You know, this new raising of the bar for action cinema, as I've said time and time again in this review. But that's all I have. Tucker, any closing thoughts?
No, I think we've talked about this film so much. There's so many more moments we could really drill on. But if you're watching this movie for the first time, if for some reason you haven't watched it and you watched the end, there's still moments we haven't spoiled for you.
Absolutely.
There's still so many moments of someone getting something done to them that should not ever happen to a human being. And I'm sitting in my theater like, I can't believe they thought of that. What a fantastic movie. This is my number one of the year so far.
Oh yeah.
And God, you know what? I'm excited for Ghost of Tsushima now, because Chad Stahelski just keeps one-upping himself. So we're in a new era of action cinema, and Godspeed. Thank you, John Wick, for your service. Oh, also he dies. We should talk about that real quick.
Oh yeah, probably.
He dies, and it's kind of underwhelming.
Is he in heaven or hell? Who's to say?
Yeah, but
because he's probably not dead. That's the thing.
He's probably not dead, but he like falls over, and then hard cuts to them at a grave. And then that's it. I actually think that's not a very good ending for the film. I don't mind that they have killed the character as far as we know. I don't think that ending a series like this with the main character dead is a bad thing, but I think that could have been done with a little more gravitas.
Sure, yeah.
It was a little underwhelming.
But I also think it's supposed to be obvious to us that like he's not dead. Like even Ian McShane and Lawrence Fishburne, like they kind of have this knowing about them in that final scene where they're like, we know he's not dead, and the audience, you know, he's not dead. We're gonna do another one of these, but we're just taking we're just taking a little breather, just taking a little break from John Wick. That's okay. I think
Yeah.
we need that as a society. And Tom Cruise is going to tell him that take that. He's going to take that baton and he's going to keep running with Mission Impossible. And James Cameron's got that baton too with Avatar. Okay.
Yep.
We're eating good. We're not starving for action cinema here. We are eating good, folks. And we'll be here to break down all of those tasty action meals right here on Backlot Banter.